Greetings, everyone. My name is Bridget Cabrera, she, her, hers, and I'm the Executive Director of Methodist Federation for Social Action. MFSA is an over 100-year-old faith-based policy and organizing network. Our mission is to mobilize, lead, and sustain a justice-seeking United Methodist movement, energizing people to be agents of God's justice, peace, and reconciliation. And we're excited to be co-hosting this series of webinars with our partner, United Methodist for Kairos Response, and this particular webinar with our partners, Fossil Free UMC. UMKR, United Methodist for Kairos Response, is an international justice movement of United Methodist laity and clergy responding to the Kairos Palestine document and the ongoing work of Kairos Palestine and Global Kairos for Justice. They educate and mobilize advocacy for Palestinian rights within our denomination and beyond, striving for the goal of freedom, justice, and equity for all the people of the Holy Land. We acknowledge that this land, the many lands that we are all joining from, its history and all the being seen and unseen, known and unknown, as we step into our work on this land and these many lands, most of us as uninvited guests. We offer this work in the spirit of reparation, devoting ourselves to justice as we strive to uplift the legacy of this place and these places. We invite you to acknowledge the indigenous land of where you are joining from and type that in the chat. A few announcements concerning our call today. By participating in our webinars, we covenant together to co-create an equitable and brave space where we learn, engage, and grow in relationship together. We are recording this webinar, and that recording will be shared in the coming days. You'll be able to find that on both UMKR's website and MFSA. As you have questions, please type them in the chat. You don't have to wait for our Q&A session to officially start to ask those questions. As they come to you, go ahead and type those in the chat, and we will get that to the moderator. And closed captioning is automatically generated, so do expect to see some spelling errors, but we do have that available. Today, our moderator is Lisa Bender. Lisa is the moderator, is co-chair of the steering committee of United Methodist for Kairos Response and the chair of UMKR's Boycott and Divestment Committee. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Bridget, and hello, everyone. UMKR learned about the Boycott Chevron campaign last spring. Chevron is extracting oil and gas resources off the coast of Gaza, which benefits Israel instead of Palestine. UMKR's leadership agreed we should join the boycott. And so we sent a letter in July to Chevron's CEO to advise him we were joining the boycott until they leave those gas fields. We attend meetings of the Boycott Chevron Coalition, where we meet others from around the world, some of whom have been boycotting Chevron for a number of years due to the harm the company causes to the earth. We read that young climate change activist Greta Thunberg advocates the boycott for both reasons, saying, quote, "The oil giant is also fueling Israel's genocide in Gaza. As Israel bombs hospitals, homes, and schools in Gaza, Chevron supplies them with energy through 2 Israeli-claimed gas fields in the Mediterranean, making millions in the process," unquote. We felt this was a good opportunity to merge the justice work of UMKR with our friends in UM Creation Justice group called Fossil Free UMC. So we invited them to partner with us, and they too joined the boycott. Today, we have speakers from Fossil Free UMC and from 3 key leaders in the Boycott Coalition who will share with us the harm that Chevron is causing, resources we can use, and actions that we can take. We do encourage you to add your name to our United Methodist letter to Chevron. There is or will be a link to that in the chat. and it's on UMKR's website. I'll introduce each speaker as we go, then we'll entertain a few questions as time permits. So we may go slightly longer than 1 hour. You can type your questions into the chat directed to the host, Methodist Federation for Social Action. When we stop the recording, we'll invite any who are interested to stay on the webinar for a brief time of open mic to greet each other and to add your own experiences with this boycott. So first, I'd like to introduce the convener of Fossil Free UMC, Sharon Delgado. Sharon is clergy in the California-Nevada Annual Conference. She is the author of The Cross in the Midst of Creation, Love in a Time of Climate Change, and Shaking the Gates of Hell. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here with everybody. I'm going to talk today about the Chevron boycott as a climate justice issue. Like Greta, I support the boycott for both reasons. But I don't know if everybody knows, but actually the Chevron boycott was started by climate justice activists about 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago. So Fossil Free UMC, thank you. Our mission is to move the United Methodist Church to divest from fossil fuels. Simple. And that means all fossil fuel companies. But we are joining our partner organization, United Methodist Kairos Response, and all of you in joining and supporting the Chevron boycott for a bunch of reasons, but also because it is the worst fossil fuel company, or one of the worst, but many say the worst, in terms of ecocide and as well as human rights, climate injustice. Okay, you can move the slides. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, first, Chevron's doubling down on the production of fossil fuels, even as average global temperatures are spiking. And you can see the spike, the red down in the graph, but also you can see some of the words that scientists are using. They're outdoing each other in their posts. These are quotes from some of the other scientists who are shocked and alarmed at how fast temperatures are rising, average temperatures. And of course, we all see the climate disasters, weather-related disasters multiplying. Slide. But Chevron greenwashes. They believe in addressing climate change. And see at the bottom, the human energy company. They're almost human. They're not a heartless corporation. So they greenwash and they claim to take action. Slide. Chevron's slogan, you can see it there crossed out at the beginning, is energy is at the heart of everything we do. But this report by Corporate Accountability, the title of it is Destruction is at the Heart of Everything We Do. And there are a lot of reports out about Chevron, Greenpeace, Amazon Watch, Earth Watch, and others. They all point to a corporation that ravages lands, poisons rivers and streams, destroys communities, ruins people's health, and finances violence, especially in marginalized, indigenous, poor, Black and brown communities around the world. Chevron's operations destroy people's homes in many places, their livelihoods, and their ways of life. And the record of abuses is global, including communities in Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, North America, the Middle East, Australia, and New Zealand. Slide. Please, next slide. Thank you. One of the worst examples, most expensive as far as fines go, was in Ecuador. From 1964 to 1992, Chevron drilled for oil in the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador. During those years, you can go to the next slide, It spilled around 17 million gallons of crude oil, poured hazardous waste into hundreds of open pits in the forest, and next slide, dumped 18 billion. I think we're going to the next slide. Thank you. And dumped 18 billions of gallons of toxic wastewater into local waterways. Next slide. Ecuador is the site of one of the largest oil spills in history. And when indigenous communities in Ecuador tried to hold Chevron responsible legally, Chevron threatened them with a lifetime of litigation. And the next two slides are other indigenous anti-Chevron activists from Ecuador. Thank you. And the next slide is about Chevron's ecological destruction and human rights abuses in Nigeria. Many of their abuses is a kind word to say about it, because it's just horrendous what they've been doing, is in Africa. The continent of Africa has suffered tremendously under Chevron's oil extraction, transportation, and processing. This is an example. A coastal area of Nigeria in 1998 left an oil slick that covered the entire watershed, rivers, lakes, streams, and canals. And the same thing happened in 2000 and again in 2007. And it destroyed the Ilahe people's livelihoods there and their way of life and their health. So this is another picture of that. And then in 2019, 5 Chevron oil wells caught fire and burned for over a week. So that was a huge environmental disaster. Next 3 slides are about, oh no, that's still another example of what they call sacrifice zones. These places in countries and in marginalized communities in our country that are sacrifice zones for the products that many in the dominant culture enjoy. Okay, now are the Nigerian climate activists. Not just climate activists, environmental justice activists, Chevron, against Chevron. Thank you. And I think there's one more. Thank you. And here we are in Richmond. That's close to where I live, about 2.5 hours away, the coast, a primarily Black community. There's a Richmond refinery there. And over the years, there's been constant flaring, just burning off the oil. There's been other toxic releases, explosions, fires. And in 2012, go to the next slide, please. There was a massive explosion and fire in the Richmond refinery that sent 15,000 people to the hospital. And the next slide is the plume from that fire. And it's not just Richmond, and it's not just there. Here's El Segundo, and here comes, the next slide is Los Angeles. And in the next one, the next 2 are anti-Chevron activists in Richmond. Next slide, please. Chevron is a climate criminal, an environmental criminal, and it perpetrates climate injustice. Children are among the most vulnerable to climate change, to all of the impacts, and children are most vulnerable to the pollution caused by the fossil fuels that all corporations, but specifically Chevron, is intransigent in its abuses of both human beings and communities and the planet. Next slide. One more thing about Chevron is that there have been many, we agree that Chevron's not above the law. I'm sure all of us do. But there are so many criminal and civil lawsuits that have been against Chevron that have, where judgments have come against Chevron, and they have paid less than 1%, a fraction of 1% of the legal judgments against them. They still outstanding of fines and damages and cleanup of their polluted sites. Though $50 billion, over $50 billion still. Because what they do is, instead of paying those fines, damages, and cleanup, they retaliate. They retaliate by using their money and power to bribe, threaten, hire paramilitary forces, and file lawsuits, frivolous, punitive lawsuits, against anyone who dares to hold them responsible, the company responsible for its crimes.
Sharon, about 30 seconds.
Okay, next slide. And the Alahe in Nigeria filed for damages of $2.5 million for the fires, but the Ecuadorian court charged Chevron over $9 billion for damages in Ecuador, but the company never paid a penny. Last slide, please. Chevron's a criminal corporation with an egregious record of ecocide and human rights abuses. If you're concerned about climate change and climate justice, that's one more reason to join with people around the world in boycotting Chevron.
Thank you, Sharon,
You're
for
welcome.
opening our eyes really to the evils that Chevron is perpetrating on this earth and to the people who live on it. Next, we're going to hear from Dov Baum, UMKR's longtime friend, who often advises us on boycott and divestment issues. Dov is an Israeli Jew who is director of American Friends Service Committee's Action Center for Corporate Accountability. And she is a founder of Who Profits from the Occupation and co-founder of the Coalition of Women for Peace in Israel. So thanks, Dov. Go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, that was kind of a sobering presentation. Thank you, Sharon. We are switching over and looking at another part of the world now, looking at Palestine. Chevron has joined the Israeli energy market back in 2020 when it bought another company called Noble Energy. Noble Energy, nothing noble about that, but okay. And Noble Energy had a few contracts and projects with what is called natural gas, but we call fossil gas, off the shores of Palestine, Israel. So I want to share my screen and just show you the map so you'll see approximately where are things over there. Okay, here's the map. So what you see on the map, on the lower right here, this is the land that some people call Palestine and some people call Israel, yes? And here is the Gaza Strip, here is the occupied West Bank, you see? And if we go into the sea, just across the shores, there are several natural gas, fossil gas fields that were, that are being, I don't know, exploited right now. The biggest one, and the biggest one in the East Mediterranean, and one of the biggest ones in the world is this one, Leviathan. Next to it, there is another field called Tamar. And then there are other fields that are a little smaller fields around, like Karish. So these fields are, both Leviathan and Tamar are operated by Chevron. They are owned by a conglomerate of a coalition of different investors. Chevron owns part of each of these fields and also operates them. Operating them means that they are responsible for everything with contracting, everything with the supply, everything with the development of these fields. These are their fields. That they get a little bit more of the royalties too as operators. Each one of these fields also has platform, a processing platform. Here is a Leviathan platform connected with a pipeline to the Leviathan field, and here is a Tamar platform. It's kind of funny because you see how it spans the whole length of the country. It's a small country. The Tamar platform, it's very hard to see in this map, but it is really just off the shore of the Gaza Strip. It's really just on the international border, just next to the territorial water of Gaza. It's not really here, it's here, okay? That's a difference. Another thing that the company is invested in Palestine is a pipeline. And it is a pipeline that connects Ashkelon here, or is here, this town of Ashkelon. It's called the EMG pipeline, it's yellow, to Al Arish in Egypt. This is already in Egypt. And this is the main pipeline used to export gas, natural gas, from the Israeli fields to Egypt. Now, it looks very complicated, but I wanted to show you the map because I want to explain what are the implications of each one of these things. So let's start with the big gas fields, Tamar and Leviathan, and Chevron's involvement in these. What it means is that Chevron actually supplies, through this, the production of this fossil gas, about 70% of the fossil gas used for energy in Israel. So that makes them a major partner of the Israeli government and of the Israeli regime. Not only that, it also makes them a major partner in what we call energy apartheid. So let me just pause for a moment and explain what is energy apartheid. Energy apartheid means that across the entire land of Palestine and Israel, Israeli Jews and Palestinians have different rights. They have different legal rights, they have different access to energy. And you can see it in many different ways. For example, I think 2 years ago, just before the war, some of us were there on a delegation and we visited villages in the South Hebron Hills. Some of them unrecognized villages in the South Hebron Hills. And if I just see people here who were on the delegation, and I was like, do you remember that we were there visiting a Palestinian community that is struggling to stay on its land for decades and decades? Some of the same communities that you can see on this film, No Other Land, that just won the Oscar. Yes, same area, same people. And how they are not connected to the electrical grid, the Israeli electrical grid. I called it the grid. It's also the grid, the grid. And you can see the electrical lines going over their heads, connecting the next door Israeli Jewish settlement with some chicken coops that they had across the other way from their own town. So the chicken coops that for the chicken, they had electricity, but not for the people living on their land for decades, the indigenous people of the land. In other parts, like in the Jordan Valley, we have communities that are off the grid and have to kind of build their own solar panels for their own electricity. And the Israeli military and settlers come again and again and again and destroy their panels. So they won't have electricity, so they cannot be sustainable. In other parts, there are punitive electrical cuts. So the Israeli electrical company, IEC, Israel Electrical Company, shuts off the power to specific communities as a punitive measure. And in some parts, like in Jerusalem, for example, we know that the same companies, the Israel Electrical Company, charges different prices, different rates for electricity from Palestinian industry, for example, because they want to make it harder for Palestinian industry to grow. It's as simple as that, energy apartheid. And of course, like Carol wrote in the chat right now, a glaring example is Gaza. Over the many years since 2007, the Israeli military siege on Gaza, the Gazans' sole energy production plant, the power plant in Gaza that was built and rebuilt, and it was bombed again and again and again by the Israelis. So the Gazans became completely dependent on supply of electricity from the Israel Electrical Company and from production of electricity using small generators in different places. It also used gas coming from and petrol coming from Israel. by the way, not as charity. They paid for it in a very high price. And of course, that supply was completely cut off about a year and a half ago. So this is energy apartheid, and this is what Chevron is complicity. I will give you two more elements of this crime. If you saw on the map, one of these gas fields, Tamar, had a platform, a processing platform just off the shores of Gaza. And I also told you that there is a big pipeline going to Egypt just off the shores of Gaza. Israel, for many years, has been securing the platform and the pipeline by preventing any kind of maritime activity near the platform and the pipeline. So over the many years of the siege on Gaza, when you heard how Palestinian fishermen were being shot at, Palestinian fishermen were not allowed out at sea at all, or allowed only up to 3 nautical miles off the shore, very, very short distance where they couldn't fish properly and sustain their communities. This was all due to the security of the processing rig and of that pipeline. And finally, the pipeline itself that provides this fossil gas from Israel to Egypt, which is a major, major income source for Chevron. Most of their income, which was about $1.5 billion last year from these two gas rigs, $1.5 billion just last year, most of their income comes from exports to Egypt. And that pipeline is just illegal by international law because it goes off in front of the shores of Gaza. Gaza is not part of Israel. It's under military occupation. In other words, this is a form of pillage. It is a war crime. Chevron is not allowed to exploit this area for its own economic growth or for the Israeli economy's economic growth. It is just illegal by international law. So this is our case against Chevron in Palestine, and you can learn more about it on our website. There is a website for the coalition, boycottchevron.info. There is a fact sheet there. There is a lot more. There are many, many more tools for organizers, and I'm sure we will learn more about it from the next speakers.
Thank you, Dove, for all that research. Wow, you've inspired us and still muted. All right, can you hear me? All right, so in any event, thanks again, Dove. Yeah, it's really good to know these specific reasons why UMKR decided to participate and promote this Chevron boycott for how it is impacting and benefiting Israel and harming Palestine. All right, so next we will hear from Olivia Catby, who will share more broadly the work of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement that organized the whole Boycott Chevron coalition, and a little more about the work of the coalition. Olivia is the North American coordinator of the Palestinian BDS National Committee, known as the BNC. Thanks, Olivia.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, I'm going to share my slides. All right. So really quick, for anyone who's not familiar with BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement is a Palestinian-led movement that engages in nonviolent tactics to pressure Israel to stop its violations of Palestinian human rights. The BDS movement was launched in 2005, and it was really inspired by the South African anti-apartheid movement as well as the U.S. civil rights movement. And there are three main demands of the BDS movement, which are, number one, an end to Israel's occupation of all Arab lands and dismantling the illegal apartheid wall. Number two, full equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel. And number three, the right of return for Palestinian refugees. So these have been the demands since the BDS movement's founding in 2005. obviously, right now, our first and foremost concern is the genocide in Gaza. But these three overall demands remain central to the BDS movement. So what's on this slide? Criteria for choosing a BDS target. Lots of people are personally boycotting brands that have stated support for Israel, or are complicit in some way, and that's great. But we really want to stress that BDS, first of all, isn't just about consumer boycotts, and second of all, it's most effective when it's taken as a collective action. So more important than your own purchases and investments is working within an organization, a union, a church, a coalition to organize a campaign and build power around a specific target. So when you see these massive lists of dozens and dozens of companies to boycott going around on social media, just keep in mind the goal is not to boycott as many companies as possible. That's not sustainable or effective. The goal is to pick a few targets and exert enough collective pressure to actually win a campaign. So when selecting a BDS target, we generally consider these four following criteria. Number one is the level of complicity involved. And the deeper the complicity, the easier it is to mobilize support against that target. And there are hundreds of international companies and banks that are in some way complicit. So an example I like to use is rather than targeting any international athletic footwear company that sells shoes in Israel, we had a campaign targeting Puma, which was a sponsor of the Israel Football Association. And the IFA had teams in Israel's illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian land. And we won that campaign. Last year, Puma stopped sponsoring the IFA. So that's an example of how we targeted a company based on their specific complicity with a specific demand. And Dov just talked about Chevron's specific complicity. So Chevron owns and operates gas fields and pipeline in the Eastern Mediterranean and is providing Israel with the energy it needs to maintain its subjugation of the Palestinian people and helped fuel Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Number two is the potential for forming a broad cross-movement coalition against the target. So the campaign targeting Chevron is a great example of that because Chevron has also been a target of climate movements worldwide, indigenous movements worldwide, and that's helped us build a really big coalition around this target. And intersectional coalitions are so important to maximize the potential of winning, especially against these massive corporations, and especially at a time right now in the US where there are so many movements that are under attack, and we have to stand together. And number three is media appeal. So if two companies are equally complicit and we have to choose one, usually we want to go after the one that either is more publicly recognized or has like some specific hook that will be appealing to the media, because media attention is really important for BDS campaigns, and it allows us to educate and reach out to a much larger audience and also put pressure on the target. Number four is the possibility of success. So even if the first three conditions are met, we don't want to launch a campaign against a target unless we have a reasonable chance of success. And, sometimes success can just mean, really breaking into a new focus area and reaching a wide mainstream audience. But usually, we want to actually win. We want to actually force these companies to withdraw from Israel, and we want to isolate Israel on a global stage. We don't just want to do actions to make moral pronouncements. So we do think that the Chevron campaign is winnable. As Dov mentioned, Chevron entered the Israeli market in 2020 with the acquisition of Noble Energy, and they can just as easily exit, but we need to build the pressure on them to do so. So these were the four criteria in mind when we chose Chevron as a target. There are several oil and gas companies that are complicit in Israel. And we're not saying those are better. We're just saying this is the one we're targeting right now. So as I mentioned, Chevron entered the Israeli market in 2020. We listed them as a target for divestment in 2022, but there wasn't really an active campaign in terms of Palestine around Chevron. However, in 2024, after the genocide started, that's when we decided it was time to escalate the campaign. And we started that by calling for a consumer boycott of Chevron gas stations and Chevron branded gas stations, which includes Texaco and Caltex gas stations. And groups in Australia have actually launched a huge nationwide boycott campaign targeting Caltex, which is the one in Australia, which is really cool. So this idea was really inspired by the Shell boycott during the South African anti-apartheid movement. The boycott of Shell was first called for by miners in South Africa who worked in the mines owned by Shell, and it really took off. Pickets at gas stations led to multiple gas station franchises announcing they were no longer going to affiliate with the company. Major unions and universities divested from Shell. Union officials were arrested protesting against Shell. So there was this huge groundswell of support for this particular campaign, not least because it was easily identifiable in the community. You know, there were physical locations all over the country, which was great for building a base around the campaign, getting people together. But there were also major opportunities for divestment, and Chevron is the same. So the BDS movement was founded in 2005, and since then we have had countless victories, forcing major companies to withdraw from Israel completely. Major funds have divested hundreds of millions from Israel and from complicit companies. So we know that boycott and divestment is effective, and we know that sometimes these campaigns can take years before we actually have that breakthrough, and we think that we can do that with Chevron. So the main components of the Chevron campaign are consumer boycott. So that means, you know, individually, you're not going to buy Chevron gas. We have a pledge that you can sign online, hoping to get 100,000 signatures on it this year. But boycott can also look like an institutional boycott. So your city or your union pledges not to fill official vehicles at Chevron gas stations, for example, or your whole congregation signs on to all boycott Chevron. Gas station picketing and organizing. So gas station pickets have been really great for base building. Chevron stations are a physical place for people to gather and get to know one another and learn how to do a coordinated action together. But it's also been a really good opportunity to talk to gas station owners and put pressure on gas station owners, you know, the franchise owners who have contracts with Chevron, getting them to sign on to a letter we have to Chevron, asking them to withdraw from their business in Israel. And I think Paul will probably talk more about that. Divestment. So many cities, states, pension funds are invested in Chevron. Sponsorships and partnerships. Chevron really tries to whitewash its reputation by sponsoring all kinds of community events. They sponsor marathons, golf tournaments, forums, the symphony. There's a great map on boycottchevron.info, which has a lot of the US sponsorships. Universities, Chevron has partnerships with universities. You know, they get their name on a building. They come to recruitment fairs trying to recruit students. They have research partnerships. Shareholder engagement. So we do have a resolution coming up at the upcoming shareholder meeting. And then still trying to explore other forms of pressure on the company. So that can just look like media attention. It can look like worker organizing. We have been talking to some workers within the company, and also just disruptions. Right now, there's a big protest going on at Sarah Week in Houston, which is a big energy conference. All the energy executives are there. Lots of people are there right now protesting Chevron. Last year, there were activists in East Bay who found out about 2 different private events that Chevron executives were going to, and they disrupted them and shut them down. So, you know, making sure that this is not a campaign that they can ignore. So some updates on the campaign right now. This past year, we've had some great coordinated global actions. We had Anti-Chevron Month, which has been organized by Amazon Watch for the last 10 years around, you know, climate demands and what Chevron has been doing in the Amazon. But this past year, it was really focused on Palestine. And we will have another Anti-Chevron Day again this year in May. It's always ahead of the annual shareholders meeting. We also had New York City Climate Week. There were groups around the world that took part in actions that helped really like kickstart the campaign this year. That was when Greta Thunberg and Naomi Klein and some other big names kind of, spoke out in support of the campaign. And then in February, we had a weekend of action around the quarterly earnings call, and there were over 30 actions across the US as part of that. In 2024, we had 3 US cities divest from Chevron: Portland, Maine; Hayward, California; Alameda, California, divested from all fossil fuels and weapons companies. We hope to see 3 more in 2025. And already in 2025, we've had a Chevron sponsorship dropped here where I am in Portland, Oregon. Chevron was sponsoring the Portland City Club city council forums, and city councilors who knew about the BDS campaign got them to drop that Chevron sponsorship. And we've had 3 gas stations in the US sign on to the letter to Chevron calling on them to withdraw from their business in Israel. 2 just in the last week in Tampa have signed on, and one of them put one of our signs in the window, which you can see on the slide here. What was that?
About 30 seconds left.
Oh, okay, perfect. So yeah, just I'll wrap up here. There are a variety of ways to participate in the campaign. Really glad that you all are here and learning about it, and hope to see you get more involved.
Thanks so much. Olivia, for sharing the thought behind the decisions of what companies to boycott and why, and about some of the successes. That was great to hear from you. So now we'd like to turn together to learn more about how we can pressure Chevron to change their ways. We did have a last-minute swap of speakers from the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights. So now, instead of hearing from Leah, we welcome Paul Ford, who is on the US CPR's coaching. He is their coaching and research coordinator, and he's doing research and local support on the campaign. So he's going to share a brief training on how to take action in our own communities.
Yes, it's nice to speak with you all today. Give me a second to share my slides. Okay. All right. So the Boycott Chevron campaign is an opportunity to take our skills from months of mass mobilizing protests and apply them to a strategic target. So later, I'm going to talk about where we can win for Palestine, the people, and the planet. So here's a map from AFSC. You can click, you can go visit their website to see more of an in-depth map. But we're really trying to target Chevron in our communities, building campaigns and coalitions of ordinary people to push both Palestinian and environmental justice. So this was talked about earlier, but this is built off of the South African apartheid movement that targeted Shell. So we've seen that there are practices that work, and so we want to make sure that we can replicate that impact. So here are some pictures that show some of the Shell activism that's occurred in the past. And so now we want to talk about understanding location options. So the main things that we're going to highlight is that we want to make sure that we're targeting Chevron-owned gas stations. We want to make sure we're targeting auto stores selling Chevron-branded products, Chevron franchise-owned gas stations, and Chevron office buildings and refineries. I'm going to talk about each of those things on the further slides. So Chevron-owned gas stations, the big ask for these are to make sure that we're asking consumers to boycott Chevron. So the flyer to hand out, or there will be flyers to hand out. Other applicable tactics will be stickering, flyering, picketing. The biggest strategic approach is to make sure that you're keeping a routine presence to maximize the power of the campaign. Next, we want to make sure that we're targeting the auto stores. The ask for this is making sure that we ask consumers to boycott Chevron branded products. So in this tactic, stickering is actually going to be more helpful. If you go into some of the stores, you can actually put like stickers that have been made by different campaigners like USCPR. to let consumers know Chevron's complicity in these injustices. Next, Chevron franchise-owned gas stations. So this approach will be a little bit different because as we're targeting Chevron as a larger corporation, there are smaller business owners that we don't really want to target specifically. So we want to ask franchise owners to sign a letter demanding Chevron end its business in apartheid Israel. And then from that point on, there's more of an in-depth talk. This toolkit will be available to you so you guys can see more of those strategic actions. But the important thing to do first is make sure to approach the franchise owners and ask them to side with us so that we can engage in more further coalition building to strengthen our initiatives. And then lastly, the Chevron office buildings and refineries. So these are going to be big for picketing, rallying, and marching. So the ask is making sure to reach consumers, workers, and neighbors to stigmatize Chevron's practices via street outreach and media covering. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about pickets and action step by step. So there's a lot more on this in the USCPR toolkit. You'll have access to this at the end of our presentation. But yes, we have much more available. But we wanted to also open up to see what do you see in this campaign that's working correctly. You guys can put in the chat, but some of the things that we, USCPR, have identified about this campaign is that there are signs specifically mentioning Palestine. So clearly creating that connection that Chevron engages in injustices that affect Palestinians. Also, there are signs. They had chants that they participated in together to make sure that their voices and the message that they wanted to hear was being pushed out correctly. So, and for picketing, some of the packing list that we created, some must-haves that make sure that you have flyers and someone to hand out those flyers as tangibles. Make sure, like I said earlier, Palestinian flags and colors to make sure that people are associating Chevron with their injustices in Palestine. Signs of clear messaging and a chant list. And there are other things that are nice to have too when organizing and picketing. And here are two examples of flyers. The first one for gas stations. Israel's genocide machine couldn't run without power from Chevron. And then the other one for auto stores, boycott Chevron's lubricants and its associated consumer and auto product lines. And then this is more about the people power that we're building with this push. So when you start a campaign, make sure that you have people working on outreach that will send texts and emails. Make sure that you have people engaging with photos, social media, and leading the media push, posting actions, making sure they're delegating some of that photography, and making sure that it has the most reach. Supplies and printing lead, making sure that someone is there to make sure that all the materials that you need are printed and ready to go. A check-in and check-out lead, making sure that people who participate in the action are noted and kept up with, making sure that we continue communicating with them after the initial action, and then also making sure that there are hype people to amplify the voices of the people that are there. And also, when you engage with this organizing, we want to make sure that you think about like an organizer. So one of the material goals about impacting Chevron is how many consumers can you turn away? And then one of the people goals in growing the movement for Palestine, how many people can we activate to volunteer? How many people can we bring or recruit to the movement to support? So now I'm going to talk about a little bit more about stickering and flyering. So boycott flyering, there's more in the toolkit about this, but making sure that you have something that people can take with them, tangibles, so that they can see the injustices and that they can share it with others. And stickering, like I said earlier, stickering is a pretty low effort way to also share and promote some of the injustices that are happening that Chevron is complicit in. So you can print stickers. There are already print stickers that we have designed for you to download and print. You can also design your own, but it's something that we've seen to be pretty effective. And that's our toolkit for organizing. So if you want more, we'll give you access to the Chevron toolkit, and we also have a recording of our training, which is a bit more in depth. But that's all I have. So thank you.
Wow, thanks, Paul, for filling in for us so well at the last minute. I know that there if you look on the map of the United States and see where the gas stations are, they're mostly along the West Coast and across the South. In my area, there's no Chevron stations, but I was able to use the map and find out where there are some auto stores. So I reached out to the local Palestinian community in Harrisburg, and we're going to plan a time to visit those Pep Boys stores and talk to them and use the flyer that I saw developed. And I also heard from some of our colleagues in Michigan that they're actually taking a resolution to their annual conference, asking the annual conference to endorse the boycott. And that's an idea for any of you who are involved in your annual conferences or any place you can have a bigger statement made, because it helps with education. It just helps to wake people up. So I think we have a little bit of time here for questions and answers. So I need to look here. The first question I think would be, and I'm not sure, is probably not a good time to catch Sharon, but Sharon, you're still here.
It's okay.
They want to know whether you'll continue the boycott because of fossil fuels, even if our part of the boycott wins.
That's a great question. I haven't thought that far ahead. You mean if our United Methodist Church divests from fossil fuels?
Well, no.
Is that the question?
Well, I guess that would be part of it. But no, if the big campaign that the environmentalists are doing against Chevron, if that would ever, would you continue to boycott?
I don't know the answer to that question.
All right. Well,
I don't. In fact, I haven't. I don't. I think now so much of what I hear about the boycott is directed towards the Israel occupation and attacks on Gaza that that's about most of what I've been hearing lately. It's kind of morphed in some ways, as far as I know, but I know it's still valid, and I know in some areas of the world it's happening for sure. But as far as here, I hear mostly about the Gaza. So I'll have to look into that. I'll have to ask somebody who knows more than I do about that.
All right. Well, I'm glad to know that what you're hearing most about is our efforts related to Israel-Palestine. That's really good news. And let me see here. Somebody is asking if we could get this webinar into a 10 to 15 minute presentation for congregations to use. And I don't know whether any of the resources that are out there might be something like that. Do any of you have a suggestion for what people can do in their local church to spread the word? Any presentations that are short, more compact, ready to go? USCPR or AFSC?
Well, I can always jump in and, recommend the website, boycottchevron.info. We have a fact sheet and, people can read. I don't know. So maybe they can read it and have it a discussion group, a study group.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? So I wanted to share a little bit of information, especially for any of the folks on the call who are United Methodist, that part of the reason that we engage in boycotts is because there's a tradition in the United Methodist Church of using boycott as a way to change a company's policies and practices. And I found out not too long ago that our founder, John Wesley, back in the 1700s, actually supported a boycott of sugar because it was involved in the slave trade. So our history goes back quite a ways. And in recent years, the church has used this nonviolent method of protest by boycotting companies, for instance, to gain protection for farm workers, unionists, even nursing mothers through the Nestle boycott years ago. And of course, to oppose apartheid in South Africa, which was mentioned today, related to the Shell boycott. And also we have permission to boycott products that are made in illegal Israeli settlements. That is an official stand of the United Methodist Church. And that is partly because we're following our social principles. And our social principles state that we urge consumers to exercise their economic power to encourage the manufacture of goods that are beneficial to humankind while avoiding those produced through exploitative labor practices. We support peaceful and nonviolent efforts, including boycotts, letter writing campaigns, appeals to stockholders, and divestiture as effective means of expressing collective dissatisfaction with companies that engage in unjust or harmful practices. So that is part of the background to why the United Methodist Church is involved in this and have been involved in other boycotts. I don't see that there are other questions. Let me get back to that document. I can find it again. What is sign tapping? I don't know. Did somebody say the word sign tapping? I don't. Does that mean anything?
It was Paul.
Paul, sign tapping.
I'm telling on you.
Yeah, so I think Leah might have more to add on sign tapping. But I think like what we were sharing about signs is ways to get people's attention, ways to pull in visual support, even people who aren't stopping at a Chevron gas station. So yeah, I think Leah from USCPR, the campaign director, would have more to say on that.
All right. And here's a question that there are several Chevron gas stations in Albuquerque that are independently owned, and that the person writing feels uncomfortable doing anything that might impair the livelihood of gas station owners. So the question is, should we restrict our actions to talking privately with the owners about switching suppliers rather than trying to turn away customers?
Yeah, I can jump in. We want to boycott Chevron wherever it is, and whoever sells Chevron gas, we will not buy from them. So the boycott is on even for privately owned little family gas stations. However, we do not want to picket outside such gas stations. And if you go to the map in the chat, you can see that they are differently marked. What we want to do with private gas stations is to ask them to join the campaign, just like you saw in the picture that Olivia shared. They can actually sign a letter to the company. This is a quiet technique, we talk to people on people, we try to convince them to support the campaign. They don't have to do it publicly. We don't want them to be harmed, but we are hoping that they will put a sign in the window or send a letter to the company, or maybe later on consider switching to another provider.
I hope that's helpful to the folks in Albuquerque or any of you that find a gas station nearby that's owned by private folks rather than company owned. Well, I think we've reached the top of the hour, and there aren't any more questions that I see in our chat document. So I'm going to say thank you very much to our speakers. We have been so privileged to hear from you. And we urge everyone on the call to spread the word about the boycott. And if it's possible for you to get out there and do some stickering or do some picketing, talking to gas station owners, please do. And then let us know how it goes, because we're always looking for feedback so that our techniques and tactics can be adjusted as it might be appropriate. So I'm going to turn this back over now to Bridget. Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, thank you again for joining us. Again, we did record this webinar, and so that will be sent out soon. It'll be up on YouTube and our websites. They'll also be sent out probably in our newsletters as well, both UMKR and MFSA. And be on the lookout for information on our next webinar that will be in May. Thank you again.